Here we go. Hello there, everybody. My name is Vayu Tiger. I'm very glad to see you here, and welcome to my live stream channel. This is my very first live stream, and I picked out this person for a live stream for a very special reason because, as well as you may know, I have a love for antiquity, and I feel like it's only appropriate that I bring in someone who has that same interest to a great extent. So I'd like to introduce Michael Levy, or Michael Levy per se. What
Um,
what do you prefer?
um, well, living reincarnation of Orpheus. But, but besides that, just call me Michael Levy.
Okay, well, now I want to tell the audience a little bit because I'm sure other people found you the same way I did. Because as a lover of archaeology and history, I typed in like the oldest song in the world or something like that. Then then the Hurrian Hymn came up, and I saw two versions of it on your channel. I saw one when you was playing, then I saw one where you put up a picture of it. So
Oh yeah,
that
like a slideshow, and then there was like the live performance sort of thing. The first time I tried to play the thing.
yeah. Then you let a person also use the song, right?
Sorry.
Like I said, I saw another upload of it that had about 1 million views of it as
Oh
well.
yes. Yeah. Because it sort of went semi-viral, and then other people asked me for their permission to use it because, well, as an independent artist, the more free publicity I can get, the better. And yeah, it's went viral on their channels as well. So it must have been about altogether on the net, probably about 3 million views so far on
Oh wow.
respective channels. So roll over Bieber, I'm on my way.
Yeah. So I have a question. When it comes now, since we kind of realize what you've done here, where you play the ancient lyra, um, the question is, what got you into this?
Oh, that's a very good question. I've been fascinated with ancient music since I was about 14. I was having a look through my regular sort of music store. I happened to find a dusty old cassette tape of the late great David Munro. Obviously, I was only 14 years old and never heard of the guy, and he was an expert in recreating medieval music. The moment I listened to this, I wasn't in a museum. It was the effect of it was so much more profound than just going to a museum. It was you were actually there. It took you back to the minds of these troubadours and whatever, and I found it absolutely amazing, a transporting experience. That's when I first discovered the power of music to transport the mind like a magic carpet back in time in a way that's much more direct and immediate than any other tangible sort of way you can do that. It'd be like going to a museum or seeing an ancient artifact. Music takes you there literally. That's how I first became interested in ancient music. Now, regarding the lyre, I was also about 14 years old, and I first wondered what on earth a lyre would sound like. And the reason I got interested in this, was an old LP. What was it by? It was like John Williams guitar with Julian Bream, and it was called their arrangement for two guitars of Pavane for a Dead Princess. And this is a wonderful piece of classical music. But the thing is, in the middle part of it, it goes into one of my favourites of the ancient Greek modes, which was misnamed the Dorian mode in the Middle Ages, but the actual ancient Greek name for it is the Phrygian mode. The equivalent intervals is D to D on the white notes of the piano. Absolutely haunting, and I wondered, maybe this is what the lyre of Antiquity might have sounded like. So for about 20 odd years after that, I always wondered, what did the lyre sound like? And my dream came true back in 2006. I was just browsing around Amazon to try and find some interesting music. Klezmer music, that's one of my other fortes. That's the traditional Jewish wedding music of old Eastern Europe. And during my browse, I found a CD called Ancient Echoes, Music from the Time of Jerusalem music from the time of Jesus in Jerusalem's Second Temple. And this really got my imagination going, because this CD by the San Antonio Vocal Ensemble attempted to recreate the music of the Levites, my very own ancient Levite ancestors, who I later discovered played their lyres, called the kinnor, in the Temple of Jerusalem to accompany the singing of the Levitical choir. Amazing stuff. And in the album notes of the CD, I saw a picture of a modern evocation of a kinnor, the instrument I'm holding in my hand now, in fact. And I found I could get one of these from eBay, and so I got one from eBay, and the story began. And that's how I got interested in playing the lyre.
Oh yeah, I mean, the thing is, once the ancient arts of antiquity kind of stumble upon you, I wouldn't even use the word stumble, because a lot of times I find that if we do some of these ancient arts or study them or having to do with them, it requires some dedication. Like, it's not just a total accident. Like, when you're into this, most of the time you're in it 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to your music per se, how do you find the techniques to imitate more ancient music?
Talking about the sort of techniques I've sort of developed
Yeah.
for my lyre playing. Well, my actual academic background is philosophy rather than music, funny enough, and that's actually very useful for ancient music, because most of the time, even with all the artifacts present, all you have to actually interpret the artifacts, be they visual or written, is good old-fashioned argument and counter-argument. And I applied this to actually lyre playing techniques. So I thought, okay, I really want to play this instrument. How do I go about playing it? Well, first of all, you can experiment with the limitations and potential of the instrument itself. And that's quite straightforward. You can find, you can actually do lots of things. You can play it with a plectrum, or you can finger pluck the tone, something like this. So that's like a plectrum pluck, and you can finger pluck it. So that gives a more delicate sound, and then you can sort of put them both together. So that's one thing you can do. And then I explored further, and I looked at both pictures of ancient lyre players, and also I discovered in Africa where they still play the lyre today, because the fascinating thing about Africa is that the lyre ended up in Africa through ancient trade routes with ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean in Antiquity, and it's actually stayed there ever since. For example, the Kra in Eritrea, the Begina in Ethiopia, and countless other lyres that are still there today. And one of the techniques that's present, particularly Kra in Eritrea, is this thing called a block and strum technique. And that's where you block certain notes out and you strum rhythm or very basic chords with a plectrum in the right hand. And I noticed that every single illustration of the Greek Cithara players, that's the large wooden lyre favoured by the professional musicians of ancient Greece, every single one of those illustrations showed the player with a large plectrum in the right hand, vigorously strumming the rhythm while blocking specific blocking specific strings with the left hand, something like this. That sort of thing. So putting all the pieces of the jigsaw together, my techniques sort of developed over time. So answer to your question, this has been my sort of philosophical event to sort of get to the grips of the concept of lyre playing, as well as studying actual lyre players and sort of exploring parts of the world where the lyre is still played today, and there's techniques which have survived, and putting the jigsaw together. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So it's a lot like playing a chord when you put your fingers behind blocking strings. Like, does it mute the string?
It only mutes the strings that you don't require to play, and you just leave open the strings you do want to play. And you can play basic chords, you can play parts of the melody as well, just by leave like a drone open, this sort of thing. So leaving like a drone here. But moving certain hands out of the way. That sort of thing, and it's almost infinite possibilities you can do. By the way, I'm not sure. Can you, in this live stream, is there video footage of myself as well, or is it just audio? I wasn't quite sure. I'm still playing.
No. It's just me and you. There's
right.
not. Yeah. There's not any extra music.
Right. So this, yeah. So therefore, you can't see what I'm actually doing. Right.
Oh, people can actually see it. Yeah, people can actually see it.
Okay, they can see it. Yes, that's what I was just trying to establish. Right. Okay, I get that. Right, that's that clarified. So that's just some of the techniques. Other techniques, like you can do just on a guitar, you can play harmonics. I can just find the. Well, I can't do it on this instrument. I'll have to actually transfer to one of my other lyres. I'll just put this down a minute.
Okay, so that's the kinnor.
That's well, a modern evocation of the kinnor. Unlike other lyres, particularly the ancient Greek lyres, the Hebrew lyres, there's very little visual illustration as to what a kinnor might have looked like. The design of the kinnor that I was playing was based on illustrations found on coins from the time of the Simon bar Kokhba revolt against the revolting Romans in Judea. This revolt happened around the 2nd century. But that was over 150 odd years after the actual destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem by the said revolting Romans. And in the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, also up in flames went thousands of years of Levite traditions of playing the kinnors. And the illustrations of lyres on the back of the Bar Kokhba coins are literally illustrations of the ancient Greek Cithara and the chalice, the tortoiseshell form of lyre. They're almost exactly the same. So what exactly the biblical 10-string kinnor actually look like is a bit of a mystery. So as I say, that's just a modern evocation.
Yeah, I've seen different versions of it online. You have the smaller ones, but there's always that distinctive feature where there's like an inner U shape near the top.
That's just the basic arms of the lyre, basically.
Yeah.
Here's another one. This is a slightly better sounding one as an acoustic instrument. It doesn't need an amplifier, this one. This is more of a treble range. And this is probably more similar to how the original biblical kinnor might have sounded, because we do have writings from Flavius Josephus. He was a famous 1st century Jewish historian who actually witnessed the Levites play the lyres in the Temple of Jerusalem, and he tells us quite a bit about them. Tells us that they had 10 strings and they were played with a plectrum, and also in later writings in what is it now, the I can't remember, it's gone out of my head, what's it called, the I can't remember it now offhand. An early rabbinical text, is it the Talmud or something?
Yeah, the Talmud. Yeah, the Talmud.
I couldn't quite think of the name. And they describe in this text the proportion of kinnors to another type of lyre played in the Temple of Jerusalem called the nevel. And there are proportionally a lot more kinnors than nevels, and that tells us that the kinnor probably was a treble string instrument, just like in a modern orchestra you have proportionally more violins than cellos and double basses. And also we know that the the thicker part of the intestines of sheep were used for the nevel, whereas the I think it was the upper part of the sheep's intestines was used for the strings and the kinnor. So this instrument, this is a modern evocation of the 10-string kinnor. They call it a Davidic harp, but it's actually a lyre. And because the strings pass over a bridge, whereas in a harp, the strings pass into directly into the resonator. I've lost my train of thought now. What was the actual question I was trying to answer? This is a problem. I get so obsessed in my little tangents that I lose track. Sorry, what was the question? What was the question again?
I was just I asked about the Kinnor, if that was a Kinnor, and he was kind of explaining the Kinnor and its history.
Oh, yes, sorry.
He's talking about Josephus Flavius. Yeah, Josephus Flavius.
That's right, yes. I've got a blog, actually, on my website, ancientlyre.com. If you go to the top navigation bar, I've got a section called Historical Research, and if you go down there, it talks in depth about the biblical lyres, the Kinnor, the Nevel, and so on.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. So both of those that you've had are Kinnors, but they're just modern revisions of them, right?
That's right, yes. That's all we can basically go on. I mean, there are illustrations of Canaanite lyres, like, for example, the Megiddo lyre is a famous one carved onto a piece of ivory. And that's from around just before the time of King David. But having said that, I mean, there's we've sort of explored the archaeology, the difference between the Canaanites and the Israelites. There's this guy called Israel Finkelstein, who argues quite powerfully that maybe the Israelites were actually a lower class of Canaanite originally. And during the Bronze Age collapse, these formerly oppressed peoples who were actually lower class of Canaanites, oppressed by their overlords, found a sort of power niche and re-identified themselves as the Israelites. And another example of this, Canaanite burial ground, lots of Canaanite settlements found lots of pig bones and things, whereas the Israelites separated themselves from presumably their former oppressors. Egyptian root.
That's interesting. I was watching a documentary about that and even studying it for a little bit. It was like they really didn't find any traces of invaders coming in, like it mentions in the biblical text. So they were assuming that they were a lower class Canaanite tribe. Pretty much.
Yeah, so like I'm saying, so this goes back to the lyre. The Canaanite lyre and the Israelite lyre might have been completely different things, because the Israelites, if Finkelstein's very powerful theory is actually true, then the Israelite version of the lyre might have been completely different, to separate it apart from the horrible, oppressive Canaanite oppressors who are Egyptian ruled. That's another fascinating thing. This is going off on a tangent. Maybe the time in Egypt might have actually meant, literally, time under Egyptian-ruled Canaanite oppressors. I mean, who knows? I mean, and again, it's off on a tangent. But I've always been fascinated by the sort of my philosophical trainings. I like to explore preconceptions and whether they can be counter-argued. That's that's the sort of I'm really interested in very early history, and in particular ancient music, and that's another example of it, because at the end of the day, all you have is argument and counter-argument.
Okay, well, would you be willing to play us one of the Hurrian Hymn, if you will?
I certainly will. I'll just have to transfer back.
Yeah.
So
before we begin here, it's not going to sound exactly like in the video, right? Or it may or may not, because
no, it's not going to sound the same. That's the thing. The way I sort of play my music to make it sound spontaneous, most of it's I have a basic idea and I sort of improvise around it, because the thing with improvisation, it's complete spontaneity and it can never be repeated exactly the same. So on the viral YouTube versions, what I did, I was actually sight reading at the time, the hymn, and there's actually sheet music freely available by a guy called Clint Goss, and his arrangement was actually for Native American flute, and it's his arrangement was based on Dr. Richard Dumbrell's academic interpretation of the actual notation in the original cuneiform of the Hurrian Hymn.
Oh, wow.
Again, I've now forgotten the question again. I go off on so many tangents.
It's okay. I mean, this is exactly what I'm looking for, because once again, I like these longer shows with a lot of information and things like that. I mean,
so that was just a bit of background about the what I was doing at the time. I was talking about improvisation and how it can't be repeated. So
I just wanted to make that clear to the audience, because I think that's really important. I mean, especially when you're dealing with ancient music and things like that, and when we have like fragments to an extent, like in between. I mean, some of it's going to be improvised. Like I don't think we know exactly what it sounds like, but we have an idea with some of it, right?
Well, that's right. I mean, some of it's lost. The information is lost. I mean, okay, we have about 60 fragments of ancient Greek music, written music, but there's no indications on exactly how it was played, what sort of ensembles it was played with, and lyre playing techniques. So that's where my philosophical sort of stint comes in. I like to think of, okay, there's no difference between my mind and an ancient Greek or ancient Hebrew or ancient Egyptian musician, because in the space of 4,000 years, nothing has happened to the mind of Homo sapiens. We have exactly the same software that we operate with. So whatever I can do with the limitation of the instrument, an ancient musician could have done with the same musical imagination. That's my basic philosophy on how I sort of recreate the music. So getting back to the viral video I did of the Hurrian Hymn, I first of all quoted the tune, then I sort of did some improvisations in the middle, and at the end, until it sounded like some sort of thrash metal frenzy.
Yeah, that sounds like Jimmy Page at the end. Let's hear it. How does that sound?
Right, so I'll do more or less what I did on the YouTube thing, as close as I can do. I'm using my very first lyre, the one, this is made by Mid-East Ethnic Instruments, the one I bought on eBay. It's even got the original 10-year-old strings on it, because I still haven't figured out how to change the damn things. And the same pickup and my little Vox Phonics guitar amp. So let's just, first of all, just check the volume levels before I go headlong into this.
I can hear it fine.
That's okay, not too loud.
Yeah, it's not too loud at all.
Here we go then, here's a blast from the past, literally.
Wow. Congratulations. Wow, that was really good.
That's why as early music, as you can guess. We're talking about 100 years before the birth of Tutankhamun, 1400 BC. Well, there again, that's before the time of Moses. And there you go.
Wow. So when you found this piece, and let's talk about the song, because this is almost like your staple on YouTube, right?
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. So a bit more historical background about the Hurrian hymns. So first of all, who were the Hurrians? Well, they were an ancient civilization that lived in I think it's called Anatolia, which is like part of modern-day Turkey. And their civilization dated way, way back, I think, to around about 3000 BC. And actually, the Hurrian hymn is right at the end of the civilization, 1400 BC. And it was dedicated to Nikal. She was the wife of the moon god. I think she was actually a goddess of fertility. So it's a hymn to basically to imbuke fertility and things like that. So a real nice pagan theme to it. Incredible stuff. And the way Richard Dunrell interpreted the melody, well, on the clay tablet you have the text in Hurrian, the Hurrian language, and then there's like a double line, and above the text is like a Bronze Age guitar tab for lyre, for 9-string lyre. Basically, it quotes, it gives each of the lyre strings a specific name, and then describes the interval to be played. This is where the academic conundrums come with the interpretations of the Hurrian hymns, because there's lots of interpretations as to what these actual musical intervals were. You have a lady called Professor Anne Kilmer. She thought these intervals would be played together at the same time. But from my sort of intuitive musical perspective, her arrangement sounds basically just kind of strange. It sounds, yeah, odd. It doesn't sound very musical to me. A very similar version to Dr. Richard Dunrell's interpretation is Martin West's interpretation. But the rhythm isn't quite right there. So that's why I really like Dr. Richard Dunrell's interpretation. According to Dunrell, I mean, I can't comment because I'm not an academic musicologist, but according to him, Kilmer mistakenly thought the intervals were meant to be played together, whereas they're separate. And yeah, basically, from an intuitive musical point of view, that's why I prefer Dunrell's interpretation. But having said that, it is, at the end of the day, an interpretation, and that's why you need a bit of musical imagination to bring the tune back to life, which is what I attempted to do in my little viral videos.
Okay, so this leads me to the next question. So it was pretty much the Jewish music of the Lyre that was your introduction to the entire thing, right?
Yeah, because my musical interests are manifold. One of my musical passions is for Klezmer music. Klezmer, for the uninitiated, is basically the traditional Jewish wedding music of old Eastern Europe, the stuff that was played in the shtetls prior to the horrors of the Holocaust, which, as well as destroying 6 million innocent lives, also destroyed thousands of years of Jewish culture, including this wonderful music. And it only survives thanks to the fact that before World War II, there was massive influx to America of Jewish people from the shtetls of Eastern Europe. Obviously, you had pogroms and things before the Second World War, and amongst those people were some of the traditional Jewish musicians, the Klezmorium, as they call them, and they took with them some of their invisible baggage, these wonderful melodies, and they were recorded in America in the early parts of the 20th century. There was a massive Klezmer revival in the 70s when the significance of this almost lost music was rediscovered again from these old LPs from the early parts of the 20th century. And yeah, that's another thing that appeals to me. It was almost a lost music and it's been brought back to life again. So that's another thing. And also, I'm really fascinated by the ancient Middle Eastern modes that you hear in klezmer music and the ultimate origins of these modes. And I found that you can play them beautifully on the 10 strings of the biblical kinnor, which made me think maybe they had their origins actually on the biblical kinnors. Who knows?
Now, you brought up something very, very interesting, I think, because I think it's obviously to see that you have an interest in different kind of music you could do with the lyre. So, and you have a lot of albums out. If I remember right, I could be wrong. You made 14 albums in 3 years?
Oh, yes, a bit of an obsession of mine. We're nearly up to 30 now. Basically, I discovered this amazing thing for the independent, spare room living artist like myself called CD Baby. I discovered this in 2008. And the wonderful thing about CD Baby, as well as being able to globally distribute good old-fashioned CDs, of which I've got one CD, the very first CD I recorded, King David's Lyre of King David's Lyre, Echoes of Ancient Israel. I discovered this also, besides physical CDs, they put stuff on absolutely every other major digital musical store. And this includes things that are almost viral these days, like iTunes, Spotify, Amazon. Also recently Google Play, so you can have my Lyre music on your Samsung digital mobile phone. It's just really cool. And yeah, you just put it out there.
Would you be able to play a song off your King David album?
For that, I'm going to have to do a quick retune. It's a love-hate relationship I've got with these wonderful instruments. Unlike the guitar, there's no fretboard, so every time you want to try play something different, you've got to retune.
So it's a retuning process?
Yeah, so I'm going to tune now to what's called in klezmer music, it's called the Aharava mode, which means, I think, a rough translation from the Hebrew means abundant love or something. But also, this is actually an ancient Greek mode called the chromatic Dorian mode, which is actually used also in ancient Greece. Maybe the Greeks borrowed it from the Hebrews. Who knows? I'm just going to retune to it. Basically, this is a scale. If you go to think of the white notes on the piano, E to E. It has E to E, but with a G sharp in the middle. Let's just quickly sharpen the appropriate notes. So just bear with me a minute. So this note,
that actually sounds really beautiful, especially on this end.
But to hear it. Sorry. Going to go down a tone. A bit sharper. That's going to go down a tone. That's going to go down a bit. And all of a sudden, we're back in the Temple of Jerusalem. So I'm going to play, let me just think. Yeah, this is just a basic klezmer melody. I don't actually have the CD in front of me, which is rather annoying. So I can't remember the title of it. But this is just one of the tracks from that album. I think it's called Berdichiever Kosid. Kosid is like one of the klezmer, basic klezmer sort of dance. It sounds very mysterious when played on where the scale presumably originated from on the biblical lyre.
Wow. Oh, that's awesome, dude.
It just is a most mesmerizing sound. I mean, it's like a magic carpet, this thing. It takes the traditional sort of folky klezmer music, and makes it sound like it's played by the Levites, my very own ancient ancestors, 2,000 years ago in the Temple of Jerusalem. Fascinating thing.
Yeah, yeah, like I said, at least one of your quotes, music, venture, and time travel. So let's talk about the ancient Greek for very briefly, because this seems to be a real passion that you have.
Ancient Greek sort of music, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'll just unstrap myself from the biblical keynote, and we'll go to some.
So before we move on to the ancient Greek music, let's focus on a company that you're working with.
Yes, this is like a blessing from Apollo. About 2 years ago, I had an email from my website by a company called Luthieros, who are based in modern-day Thessaloniki in northern Greece, and they have specialised for the last 2.5 years in recreating the wonderful, beautiful instruments of ancient Greece. For example, the Cithara, the large wooden lyre of the professional music of ancient Greece, the tortoiseshell lyres, the forminx, which is an earlier form of the Cithara, and making them all, although they're all handmade, at very affordable prices for the experimental modern musician. This is what they call the Lyre 2 project. And the Lyre 2 project now also has its very own entry in the ancient encyclopedia, the ancient history encyclopedia, I should say, online. And I've got all the details about the Lyre 2 project, all the various links on the homepage of my own website, ancientlyre.com. So it's all about my collaboration in the Lyre 2 project.
Wow. Yeah, I was going through some of the Luthieros lyres, and they're quite unique. The turtle shells really caught me. I think you were playing the Apollo 3 lyra.
Yeah, that's basically a tortoiseshell. Can't say that word. A tortoiseshell form lyre called the chalice. In ancient Greece, as well as using actual tortoise shells, they also fashioned the shell out of wood sometimes. I think that was the invention of some guy called Terrapanda, if I pronounced that right in my dodgy Scots accent. Yeah, this makes a much more rich sound than the actual tortoise shell. And that's what the lyre of Apollo 3 is. I'll just grab hold of this one over here now.
Oh wow, that's beautiful.
The advantage of using a wooden resonator, you can make it as big as you like, the actual skin, and you can actually play this almost like a drum. Let's just strap myself into it.
Hopefully, you don't have to replace that skin anytime soon from pounding too hard.
Let's just see if I'm more or less in tune. My recent series of YouTube videos, they featured some experiments in the wonderful microtonal music of ancient Greece. Whereas in the Western modern world, we've have horrible standardized, monotonous 12-note chromatic system, which also uses the impure system of equal temperament. In ancient Greek times, they used wonderfully pure wonderfully pure intervals in just intonation, which is basically where you divide a scale up in much more symmetrical whole number ratios for all your mathematicians out there. And also they use microtonal scales, as well as the ancient Greek modes that you might have heard of, which is like the equivalent intervals between the different white notes of the piano. There's some microtonal music. And one of these is called, if I can pronounce it, the Archaeology and harmonic genus. This uses quarter tones. So I've been doing a little bits of experimental things on YouTube recently featuring these. I'll just give you a little blast.
All right.
Let's have a look. You see it's still in tune.
Oh wow, another good performance. Yeah. So
Slight out of tune there. Unfortunately, one of the strings I wanted to do a bit more with that, but
yeah.
live. And you might have noticed there, that's another technique I was using. Is using these wonderful replica plectrums. You can use them both to pluck the strings and also a bit of rhythm. And why not? Because the tortoiseshell form lyre, the charis, is basically a strung drum. So any ancient Greek musician with a bit of musical imagination might have done what I was doing there, just playing a bit of rhythm at the same time they were playing. Who knows?
And you say when you hit one side of it with it, you get two different sounds out of it, out of that pretty much. Like if you hit the edge, one if you hit the middle, right?
You can, yes, basically like a kind of bass drum sound, and the top part sounds more like a snare or something. There goes my earphones. Won't be a second. Just put these back in again. Right, there we go. Yeah, so there's almost no end to what you can do with these amazing instruments.
Okay,
so
now you have another lyra, another, I should say, Cithara.
Yes, a wonderful beast.
Yeah.
I'll just quickly instruct myself, and I'll just get hold of that. Won't be a second.
Yeah, it's a big wooden clunker.
Just grab hold of this. Oh, here he is.
Oh, this is a real beauty. I've seen depictions of this revision right here.
And the beautiful thing is this wonderful instrument, handmade in Greece, actually costs less than the price of a Fender electric guitar. And the funny thing is, it does exactly what a Fender electric guitar does, but it did it 2,500 years ago. It's got a vibrato mechanism. Quite a lot of modern musicologists these days tend to agree that, and I'll just move this a bit nearer so I can see what I'm on about. See these curved structures here? Mm-hmm. The ancient Greeks didn't do things just for decoration. These all had a function. And if you look very closely, just bring this in a bit to the camera, you also have these little things which, just underneath here, this is called a yoke or crossbar. Mm-hmm. And these are resting on it, and the wood is carved very, very, very fine here. These are actually where the crossbar meets the arms of the lyre. And through lots of research, some musicologists and Luthieros, in their actual practical reconstruction of this thing, demonstrates that this very likely was a vibrato mechanism. And
wow, so it was an early whammy bar.
Exactly. And this makes sense of all the different structures that you can see on the yoke. Let's just, I don't know if you can see clearly enough. You have these vertical levers. These actually are levers. When you make a lyre, when you make a Cithara, exactly as this thing is, with the thinness here, this is actually like what you call a floating yoke. It actually fits in a groove here. When you manipulate these, I'll just play first of all the scale without. That's just your basic scale coming down. Mm-hmm. Now when I manipulate these, just with finger pressure,
wow, there we go. That sounds different.
Exactly, it's an amazing thing. So you can use that for quite pronounced, almost like a portamento, which means like a bending sound, as well as vibrato. For a more subtle vibrato, see these discs either side of the oak, you lightly push these things in, that creates a more subtle vibrato. And this was, I say, 2,500 years before the invention of the Fender electric guitar. Amazing thing.
So I have a question. Is this tuning the same as the tuning as the Romans did?
Ooh, snaps me out of place there.
Was ancient Roman tuning the same as the Greek?
Now, this is a mystery. As far as Roman music goes, all we can do is infer what it might have sounded like. Since the Romans were so heavily influenced in their artistic culture by the art of ancient Greece, you can infer that they probably borrowed lots of ancient Greek ideas regarding music. So, for example, they probably used the ancient Greek modes. They probably actually borrowed some of the ancient Greek tunes. But the frustrating thing is, whereas in ancient Greece, there are about 60-odd fragments of written music that's actually survived, and it's very unambiguous ancient Greek musical notation. It uses an alphabetical system of notation. You have basically the text of the song, and they use a combination of alphabetical symbols to represent the pitch, just like we use A, B, C, D, E, F, G today. And it's very easy to infer the rhythm from the syllables of the text. But as far as the Roman world goes, absolutely nothing survives. There was one fragment apparently in a play by a guy called Terence, who was some freed slave, a comedy. The translation of the comedy means the mother-in-law. I can't quite pronounce it in the Latin, but there allegedly was one tiny musical phrase in there which was copied from an ancient manuscript by the 17th century composer Corelli. The authenticity of this fragment is very dubious. It was probably wrote down there by some medieval person trying to mislead people that there was some actual ancient Greek music out there. So there's absolutely no proof that was actually an ancient Greek musical fragment. Whatever happened to the Roman music, I don't know. Maybe when they converted to Christianity, and I think it was the 4th century, they got rid of all the good old pagan tunes. I don't know. It's a mystery.
Yeah, it's curious about that.
So for my own evocations, I say evocations, you can't recreate something that you don't know much about. For my evocations of Roman music, I base it on what is known from ancient Greek music, which is like the ancient Greek modes, and sometimes and the tuning systems, the use of just intonation, the pure tuning system and things. So yeah, that's how I sort of get around that sort of gap of knowledge.
Yeah, so with this right here, this actually resembles so much like a modern day guitar.
And that's where you get the name of our modern day guitar. The Greek way to pronounce this, Cithara, the English way, Cithara, guitar. Exactly the same thing. And you can do exactly the same things with it. Let's just show you, for example, just think what I can do. You can do like finger style sort of thing. I love doing that thing. So that's a very finger style playing, or you can use the pick as well. You'll have to excuse me, my earphone keeps falling out my ear. No, I've lost both of them. It's just called.
I understand. I have.
This is Apollo striking me down for revealing all his ancient secrets. Excuse me a minute. I'm all tangled up. Oh, I can't get them to stay in. Right. Try again. Right. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Yeah. I just knocked my earphones out. Right. Yeah, so then you can use the plectrum as well to give a more guitar-like sound. Let's just play some chord. You can actually play an actual chord.
Wow.
The advantage of having just 9 strings, this particular instrument, you can use chord blocking to play full chords. Whereas on the 10-string lyre, it's harder to do that because then you're going to be playing open strings you don't want to sound. Just trying to think of some other chords that you can play. Basically, anything you play on a guitar, you can play on this thing. So anything you can do on a modern-day guitar, you can do on the ancient Greek Cithara. Amazing thing.
Okay, so you said that there's two different sounds this produces.
Plectrum pluck tones like this. Or finger pluck tones. It's more like a harp-like tone.
Wow.
Again, you can play harmonics on it. So it's like playing, the best way to describe it is like playing simultaneously a harp, a guitar, and a mandolin, because you can also do tremolo. That sort of thing.
Okay, so did you make an album with this particular instrument?
I've just got one that's just come out called The Ancient Greek Cithara of Classical Antiquity. And you can find out in all the major digital musical stores, including iTunes, Amazon's the major ones, and also Spotify. But also on the lesser known ones like CD Baby, Bandcamp. Anywhere, basically just Google search me or the title of the thing.
Yeah, and also look in the description as well. I posted those in the description.
And this is a completely different approach I've had the ancient Greek Cithara of classical antiquity. In this album, I've used some very basic vocal lines, more to accompany the Cithara than the other way around, since I'm not a professional singer. Because in antiquity, this was designed to accompany the singing of the professional singers, the professional musicians of ancient Greece, and just crying out some basic vocal lines. So you can hear my attempt at some basic vocal lines to accompany the wonderful sound of the ancient Greek Cithara on that particular album.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I heard it. You actually sounded really good in that.
And that's mostly thanks to the masterful mixing skills of the guy who got to master the audio. So he uses a reverb sample from Belgian monasteries to give the effect of playing a Cithara in an ancient Greek temple. I love that guy. He's great. So I'm really not very technically minded when it comes to actually mastering stuff myself. But yeah, he did a very good job of it, that particular album.
So would you want to play a song or two off that album?
Let me think what I could actually play. I'll play. That's the trouble. The problem is, whenever I play stuff, most of it's improvised. It's very hard to actually recreate the improvisation. So what I'm going to do? I'm going to do a track from another album of mine called The Ancient Greek Lyre, and this is called Ode to Aphrodite, and it's this nice haunting minor. Well, it's a natural minor scale called the Ancient Greek Hypodorian mode. Let's see if I can remember it. So that was just a little demonstration how the sound can be transformed by this wonderfully recreated vibrato mechanism.
Yeah, that has more of an acoustic sound I noticed than the other ones. That's hard to describe.
Yeah, it's quite a well, it's just kind of soft tone because obviously I'm not in an ancient Greek temple, so we can't get some interesting reverbs going on because it's kind of live. It's very, very, very similar to the sound of a guitar. And despite its very large size, it's wonderfully lightly constructed, which is probably why none of these things survived from ancient Greece, because they would have just crumbled to dust after the period of about 2,500 years. But there's so many illustrations of these things on ancient Greek pottery and things that it's quite easy to reconstruct.
Okay, so I have a question, because I noticed sometimes, especially with guitars, when you use a whammy bar, the instruments have a tendency to get knocked out of tune.
Yeah, this one is a little
whammy.
bit.
Yeah, so does that do the same thing?
A little bit after time, yeah. But I find, well, on this one, there's gut strings at the top. They tend to actually survive better than the nylon strings in the bass here. The trouble with nylon strings, they stretch, whereas gut doesn't. It's much more brittle, which means it snaps easier, but it doesn't stretch as much.
Oh, what kind of strings are you playing on?
Most of these are gut strings. I think the bottom few are nylon because it's hard to get the right gauge. So yeah, it's a combination basically.
Yeah. I was wondering, that would partially describe some of the sound as well, right? Using the nylon strings, because I was actually doing some research before this interview, and I noticed that nylon strings, they have a lot more profound but a softer sound to them, right?
Yeah. Gut has a more a crisper attack basically.
Okay. Now, I saw in the comment section of one of your videos that what's that thing wrapped around your hand when you play the lyre?
This is called, well, the Greek word for it is called a telemon. Basically, it's a strap, and no matter which ancient illustration you look at, be it from ancient Greece, Rome, going back to Canaanite lyre players, they all have this strap, because just like a harp, this instrument was meant to be played with two hands. And this takes me on to one of my favourite blogs I've got on my website, which I call the urban myth of the monotony of monophony in the ancient world. This strange myth that prevails through right through all musical education, but for some strange reason, the ancients knew nothing about harmony, and harmony was magically invented by Monteverdi during the Renaissance. Also, they were codswallop. If you look at ancient instruments, for example, the Cithara, that's meant to be played with two hands, both a plectrum and the left-hand fingers, to produce two sounds at the same time. If you look also at ancient wind instruments, the aulos, the double aulos, this was in two pipes with two different reeds in it, played by two hands, playing two notes at exactly the same time.
Wow.
It's just a complete load of baloney that the ancients didn't understand harmony. Looking back at the Cithara or the lyres, how do you tune one of these things? You've got to know what intervals sound like. You need to know exactly what a fifth sounds like to be able to tune them. And since fifths sound so nice and pure, why wouldn't the ancients use them? A load of nonsense. And also, if you explore music played by Aboriginal cultures, in other words, cultures which have had absolutely no exposure to Western music whatsoever. For example, the Aka Pygmies of Central Africa, they have a tradition in singing in polyphony, singing in harmony. And a musicologist from the earlier part of the 20th century called Kurt Sachs, he was the very first musicologist to actually physically record the sound of music from Aboriginal cultures from all over the world. And as he says, absolutely every one of them, without exception, all use some rudimentary form of harmony. So what's this nonsense we have in the Western world that harmony was invented in the Middle Ages? It's a little codswallop. And then I like to explore the reasons why we have this codswallop. One of the main reasons we have this is a misinterpretation of what Pythagorean tuning was back in the early Middle Ages.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And Pythagoras basically did lots of research into dividing the musical scale up with what he called a monochord, which is basically one musical string, and he could do his mathematical genius things to split that musical string into different ratios. And one of these tunings, his version of Pythagorean tuning, was to use perfect fifths stacked upon each other to form intervals of what we call a tetrachord. That's the first 4 notes of an 8-note scale. But the mistake that the early medieval scholars did, they extended this beyond a tetrachord, so keep on extending it. But the trouble is, if you look at the mathematics of the ratio, the number ratios of the intervals, it gets progressively more and more irrational number ratios, which leads to progressively more and more dissonant sounds the more you stack these bits on top of each other. Particularly the third. The third gets sharper and sharper, and you have things eventually called wolf notes. So that's probably one of the reasons why this myth started. This we didn't use harmony, because the medieval people cocked it all up and used a misinterpretation of Pythagoras' theorem. But yeah, there was another type of tuning even before the time of Pythagoras called divisive just intonation, and this was used way back during the development of the first fretted lutes, way back ancient Mesopotamia times, about 5000 BC. And the Mesopotamians, as we know, are very, very good, just like Pythagoras was, at maths. It's thanks to them that they divided up the seconds we use to divide up time. And they also realised that if you just put frets on a fretted lute, they were the first people to do this, even before the ancient Egyptians. You have to think, well, what's the best way of dividing up a musical scale? You use whole number ratios, because whole numbers are geometrically pure, whereas irrational numbers aren't. So the resulting intervals are going to sound much purer. And this is called divisive tuning. And both tuning methods, the cyclical tuning, that's Pythagorean tuning, and the Mesopotamian system of just intonation, divisive, terminology, were both known in antiquity. So probably a good trick of a lyre player was to tune cyclically in fifths and then smooth the thirds down, because that's what happens in both the misinterpretation of medieval Pythagorean tuning and also in equal temperaments. Modern equal temperament, the thirds are a bit sharper, whereas in lovely pure just intonation, the thirds are lovely and smooth, much smoother than our equal temperament. So it's obvious that the ancient people would have used harmony. So for all the reasons, another reason why, besides, another reason, I feel like Columbo, just one more thing. Another reason why I think we have this myth that the ancients didn't use harmony was an actual ban by the very early Catholic Church on the use of harmony. I think it was about the 9th century. Because obviously they had this idea that it was to show the unity of God, their idea of the Trinity or whatever, and then they wanted to get rid of the old pagan polyphony. And that's probably why we have centuries of plain chants and boring things like this. And that's how the myth got spun, and it stayed with us ever since. And it's still taught in schools, and even people I spoke to who got a university education in music and never even questioned this. So there you go.
This is interesting to bring this up, because this is kind of where I've studied the life of Pythagoras and some of the purported writings of Pythagoras from Iamblichus and Diogenes and other sources like that. But I find him to be interesting. So some of this could or couldn't be true. He was, if I remember right, he believed so much in harmony and order and bringing that into chaos like most Greeks. This is why I think the Greeks also had harmony. is because they believed in bringing order to chaos. You know, form to shapelessness.
Exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm. And harmony is basically mathematics in music. It's basically two sounds which have symmetry, they have geometrical symmetry when played together. And the Greeks, so fascinated by discovering the rules of geometry in the first place, why wouldn't they use harmony? Because this is basically Pythagorean philosophy in audible form. It's all to do with the harmony of the spheres they extended it to. So yeah, obviously used harmony in music. It's absolute nonsense and quite unnatural that they wouldn't have done.
Oh yeah, and it's kind of funny how Pythagoras found out how to retune the lyre or even musical instruments. It's said that he was walking past a brazier and listening to the pounding of the metal.
Oh yes,
You
an
know,
animal was it? Then he realised that he could work out the vibrating. If you something to do with the vibration length or something, you split. I don't know. Then that's how he sort of more or less rediscovered the divisive tuning system that was used in ancient Mesopotamia. It's a very similar system that Pythagoras, I can't pronounce that, Pythagoras put it into more precise form, I think.
So would you say that you know, what separates, would you think, like ancient Greek music and compared to the, let's say, the classical composers of the Renaissance all the way to, you know, modern times and this evolution of music? Like what's your story on the evolution of music from the Greeks to modern times? I'm really curious on your thoughts on this.
Oh, that's interesting. One of the main things that has been lost has been the use of the wonderful, unique character of the ancient Greek modes. Like I mentioned earlier, you have a mode. If you think of the white notes on the piano, a mode is, for example, between C and C is your modern major scale. But then if you play between D and D, this creates a wonderful haunting sound, poignant sound. This is the ancient Greek Phrygian mode. Now this was misnamed the Dorian mode, and again, the mixed up Middle Ages. That's another really frustrating thing about the Middle Ages. Besides cocking up the tuning system of Pythagoras, they gave all the original ancient Greek names of the modes. Sorry, they gave the original Greek modes the wrong Greek names, and the double terminology has survived with us to the present day. So yeah, so going back to the ancient Greek modes, this is what's been lost. Let's talk you through some of the wonderful character of the ancient Greek modes. Let's just put this cumbersome thing down. I'll demonstrate some of the ancient Greek modes on one of my other little lyres. Excuse me a minute.
All right.
Where is he? This has a nice harp-like tone. This I showed you earlier.
Mm-hmm.
This is handmade in America by a company called Marini Made Harps. It's what they call their Davidic harp. But it sounds very nice when tuning, just intonation, very pure sound. Actually, slightly less pure when I was talking. So I'm talking about the ancient Greek modes and what's been lost. So you have the ancient Greek Phrygian mode, the equivalent intervals as D to D, and this is what it sounds like. Lovely haunting sound.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
I use this, this is my favourite mode. For example, one of my evocations of the music of ancient Rome, this is called Ode to Ancient Rome, just a snippet of it, and it uses this haunting mode, where I try to convey a sense of what was lost. So it's a lovely, haunting, poignant sound, and this is lost in the Western world. It's been forgotten about. It's not just sad sounding, it's poignant, it's haunting. That's the ancient Greek Phrygian mode. Let's talk you through another mode. This is the favourite mode of the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. This is the ancient Greek Dorian mode, which is the equivalent intervals as E to E. And this was confusingly misnamed the Phrygian mode in the mixed-up Middle Ages. Very intense sound, very introspective sound. I use it in one of my lots of different examples, but this is from my album, The Ancient Roman Lyre, and I call it Contemplation. It's very contemplative sound. Let me just think. And so on. I could just play that mode forever. As you say, it's very introspective, and when played faster, Plato even thought it could inspire bravery in battle. All lost and forgotten with our bland, standardised modern modes. One of my favourite modes. Sorry, anything you'd like to ask before I go rant to you on about the next of my favourite ancient Greek modes?
Okay. Well, what I was saying is, it seems like that the ancients, without the standard tuning, especially with tuning from C to C, it just sounds extremely happy. If I shall say, I don't know how to phrase it. It's almost like a real happy tuning, while the other ones, while all the other tunings that you showed so far, they have this feel that's just a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? Not just haunting.
Yes, it has different qualities, subtly different qualities, as I discovered. The thing we've got that has been lost in modern Western music, you have just a bland two monochrome choice of either composing in a major key, jolly, happy-go-lucky sound, or a minor key, which is a bit sad. But all the shades in between us have been lost. Like that other mode I just played, that's poignant as well as sounding sad. The ancient Greek Dorian mode, the favourite mode of Plato, is introspective as well as being quite sad. It's very intense, but that's lost. Another one, which is kind of half major and half isn't, this is the ancient Greek Lydian mode. Now this, again, was misnamed in the Middle Ages, but this is the equivalent intervals as F to F. This is a lovely dreamy quality. I'm going to play an actual surviving piece of ancient Greek music called a Bellman fragment in this, and it's going to be this almost sensual, almost feminine sound to this particular mode. Very dreamy. And so on. It's haunting, lovely sound, dreamy sort of sensual sound. That's your ancient Greek Lydian mode.
Wow, that's amazing, dude.
It's like,
No.
So again, you have the sort of happier sound of your major key, but with that that's the note that's different, and that sort of captures your attention and takes you to another place. Just one semitone different makes all the difference.
It does.
And
Wow.
then you have this. Is used quite a lot in modern popular music. This next scale, this is the ancient Greek Hyperphrygian mode. The equivalent intervals is G to G. Now, this was misnamed the Mixolydian mode in the mixed-up Middle Ages, and in fact, the oldest surviving complete piece of music we know from ancient Greece, the epitaph of Sikalos, is in this particular mode. I was going to see if I can sing along to it. It might be out of tune with my voice. Might try some other lyre. Let's just see, because it'd be a shame to miss out this opportunity. Let's just quickly have a lyre transplant. Just in tune.
Oh, your very first one.
Oh, hang on, I'm out of tune there. Let's have a look. Oh, no, tune it to my Klezmer scale.
Yeah.
There's that tune anyway. That might be a bit tricky. Let's go back to the other one. I'll tell you what, I probably won't sing it because it's going to be out of key. But this is an example of the ancient Greek Hyperphrygian mode. And as you can hear, it's a nice, jolly, sort of contented, warm feeling you get. And an example of a tune, a modern, well, reasonably modern tune that uses this, that sounds very similar to the ancient Greek song, is Norwegian Wood by the Beatles.
Ah.
And so on, very similar to the same tune. So yeah, all the great tunes written in the ancient Greek modes. There you go.
Wow.
And then the next mode up from that one is called the natural minor scale. The equivalent intervals is A to A, or as the ancient Greeks called it, the Pythagorean mode. Like this. Nice sort of mellow minor sound to it, just with a flattened seventh note instead of a short one.
Oh, wow.
Technical. So yeah, that's what's been lost, the unique character of these ancient Greek sounds. I played you earlier one of the Hebrew scales. That's really haunting sound. One of my favourites, called also the ancient Greeks used the ancient Greek chromatic Dorian mode, or as the in Klezmer called the Aharaba scale. Yeah, so in answer to your question, that's what's been lost. The unique quality of these wonderful ancient modes, as well as the tuning system, use of just intonation.
And that's something that I think nowadays, when we look back or hear something like that, it causes a form of dissonance compared to what we're used to in the modern world. And it really takes an open mind, I feel, to kind of accept these different keys that we're not used to listening to on the radio or listening to from our famous classical composers.
Yeah, it's just, you've got to retrain your brain, basically. Particularly just intonation. It just sounds so lovely and pure on a lyre. Whereas if you play, the best way to understand the difference between just intonation and equal temperament is to play a triad. That's a normal 3-note chord, say C, E, G, on a piano. You can hear this sort of shimmery sound. That's caused by the out of phase beat waves you get because it uses irrational number ratios. Because in equal temperament, all the semitones are artificially made equal, so you can transpose to different keys without losing the ratio of your intervals and things. But the terrible consequence of that is that each note, each interval is very slightly out of tune, and it really can have an unsettling effect if you're used to hearing just intonation. Just intonation is both more calming to listen to, but also more inspiring. And this is one of the ancient wonders of the ancient world that has been lost with our horrible, bland, standardized Western music. Even some of the great classical composers, they all used horrible equal temperament. May Apollo forgive them.
Yeah, and it's not to take away from their genius at all.
Well, yes, not taking away from that. It's a different type of thing. The thing with really ancient music, the beauty is in the simplicity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's more of what we would consider today like ancient temple music, when we can almost confer that it was more or less everyday music, you know, at least to them.
Mm.
And
I think I know what you mean.
And the value of music, I think we forget the value that music had to the ancients. They didn't have iPods, radios, televisions, or computers. They could just flip on and listen to music to. And this brings up the point, so much so that Pythagoras called this the music of the spheres. And he believed that music, in a way, governed the movement of the planets in the sky. And it's not just music being just sounds, but music being an energy, music being a wave. Does that make sense?
It does, and he was so far ahead of his time. When you look at some of the developments in quantum physics, where they're trying to describe the ultimate nature of reality, and they talk about superstrings popping around with quantum flux, and these strings are all vibrating at certain things, and depending on which frequency they're vibrating, either an electron pops into existence or a photon or whatever. And it's fascinating that just how close Pythagoras might have got to the actual reality of Plato and things got close to the actual reality of the universe.
Oh, it is. I mean, it's just insane. Pythagoras loved music so much, he just didn't stop it there to his cosmogenesis at the time. He also extended music into being one of the first potential music therapists as well.
Right, I didn't know that.
Yeah. He would sit with the students, and I don't know if you have the book, but it's called the Pythagorean Source Book. It's one of the top sources, and it compiles all the ancient Pythagoras writings and all the writers who wrote about him. And I think it was Iamblichus. He wrote that he would sit and he would pluck a note, and he would play certain notes to bring happiness to his followers or to certain people, and he would experiment with music to work on people's moods, and he believed music was a form of healing as well. So if someone was sick, he would play some music, believing it would help them feel better. Music therapy.
This goes back to the biblical story of King David soothing poor old troubled Saul with the sounds of his lyre. And that's why I tend to do in modern times, soothe the soul of people who live in this sterile, soulless modern world with the sound of my mini lyres.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I think King David is actually one of the most renowned stories of the lyre. It's probably one of the most beautiful because it adds a character to King David's persona, not just the warrior who killed Goliath or the man who or the warlord who retained his kingdom through war, but adding music, adding the lyre to his character adds much more of a sensual quality rather than a brutal one to his character.
It makes him human, because that's the thing with music. It doesn't matter what ethnicity you are, what part of what time you live in. Music has an instant effect on the human consciousness. It communicates emotion through sound, and it also, through that emotion, it also communicates intellectual values. I've actually got a blog on my website called "What is Music?" and this is my philosophical exploration of this perplexing question that first occurred to me when I was 16 years old. I was actually walking through some really pleasant woodland, listening to my antique 1984 Sony Walkman cassette. I was listening to Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, and it suddenly occurred to me, why does the sound of a piece of music about nature sound so much more amazing and direct than actually being in nature? And yeah, this was just fascinated me. What is it about music that has this effect? And I discussed this in more detail in my blog, What is Music? And yeah, see what it is. So if you agree with me or disagree with me or add a comment, I'd be fascinated to know anyone else's opinion.
Yeah, and you know, ancient philosophy is alone, just within itself, I mean, applies to music, especially in the ancient Greek world. I mean, and if we look at this as well, it also applies to a theological construct in ancient cultures too. I mean, especially with the ancient Egyptians. I mean, almost every culture had their form of entertainment in the temple. The temple was kind of like the religion conflated to government for the sake of keeping countries alive and functioning. And music played a big part.
Well, music was the vehicle to transport the congregation to the world of the gods. Because that's what music does. It transports you. It can result in trance-like states. I mean, in the modern world, look at people at music festivals, and they're all, no, it takes you to another world. And in the ancient world, when they didn't know anything about the ontology of the universe, what it's made of or anything, it literally transported them to the gods. It was like how a shaman got in touch with the animal spirits and things through music, through chant. Music is the only way. This is the only way we have of really getting in touch with our ancient roots in a way that's more direct than anything, because music communicates emotion through sound, and way before we had language, we communicated our emotions through sound. That's why it's so primordial, and it has this direct effect upon the listener.
I agree, and I kind of think this closes into the entire thing, especially when we think of how people equated music to divinity, especially when with the Orphic mysteries and Orpheus himself, you know, Apollo. It's kind of crazy to think and even accept that the ancients didn't have harmony when that's what they were seeking in music.
Exactly. It's just bizarre that this prevailing view that the ancients didn't understand harmony, when harmony is a part of nature, and we all have different pitches of voices. Even before we invented instruments, in order to sing together, some people are going to sing lower, some people are going to sing in the middle, some are going to sing higher, so they're going to find a notes which blend together. It's as natural as walking. So why people think people didn't understand harmony is absolute nonsense.
I agree. Now, I really want to thank you for being on the show. I think we're going to end it right here because, you know, you gave us more than enough information to work with and kind of digest.
I think we've covered just about everything.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know if you've done an interview like this, but, you know, I like the finer semantics and the finer details, especially in music, kind of reconstructing the past in a proper light. And sometimes it does require something a little more lengthy, you know, to kind of compare and contrast the modern to the ancient, to kind of debunk some of the mythologies that we have, and actually bring forth real facts.
Oh yeah, and it's only through music that's like looking back at our ancient music that we can improve ourselves as human beings and get back to our ancient roots and get rid of all the shallow materialism and all the manufactured nonsense which has overtaken modern music. I mean, I crave to hear a guitar solo again in popular music. It's all been replaced by people singing on bar stools and on music videos. And what's happened to spontaneity and improvisation? I want to bring it all back. In order to move forward, we need to go way back to where it all began. That's my philosophy. That's what I'm going to continue doing.
Okay, so before we go, first I want to talk about your mission here. You are trying to bring um, a neo antiquity classical music back, right?
Yeah, or if you like, a new ancestral music, because it's all original. Most of my stuff, although some does tell a few of my arrangements for surviving fragments of music. For example, the Hurrian Hymn that I did, and some ancient Greek music fragments. I don't want to be like some museum relic. I want to bring the lyre as a living tradition into our sterile, soulless modern times by composing new music in the ancient modes, the ancient Greek modes, the ancient Mesopotamian modes, ancient tuning systems, like just intonation, which you talked about, microtonal tunings, like I demonstrated as well. All these wonderful colours have been lost. And now we just have like monochrome major or minor keys, whereas in Antiquity we had like a stained glass window. in contrast, the different expressive qualities of the different tunings, the different musical modes, all that's been lost, and I want to bring it back in living colour back to the 21st century and way beyond.
Okay, is there any websites that we should know about or any projects that you can lead us to?
Well, besides my own, ancientlyre.com, please do check out all the blogs. I've got a massive load of blogs there. Also, the historical research section of my website, which discusses all the different lyres. Please also see the section on albums for solo lyres. That also shows where you can acquire all my purchases, all my various releases on all the major digital music stores, etc. Also, of course, there's the Inspirational Lyre 2 project by Luthieros, who I've collaborated with for 2 years, and the very similar mission to reintroduce the instruments of antiquity back into the modern world. So it's like a beautiful symbiosis. They want to introduce the instruments of antiquity. I want to introduce the ancient modes and the ancient tuning systems of antiquity on those instruments. Trying to think of any other suitable sites, to be honest.
Yeah, this is kind of like the self-promotion time. If you know, like if you just want to put anything out there, it's just that time frame to do so.
Yeah, please do have a look, explore my website. As an independent artist, I rely on you, the like-minded public, to listen to my music and to promote it on social media and things, in website blogs and album reviews. That's the only way that I spread the gospel of the Lyre of Apollo to the starving modern world. It's spiritually starved, and I want to bring back the radiance of Apollo.
I agree. And I also included your links in the description below for your albums. I actually plan on purchasing all 14 pretty soon. So yeah, and if you guys like this, if you guys like his music, check those out. Support him because this is quite something unique that he's brought forth with ancient music, and something that's really a rarity more than anything. I mean, I've only saw a handful of other people that are doing something somewhat similar, but they're focusing on different cultures or a different aspect. But I want to thank you for your time, Michael Levy.
A pleasure.
It means a lot to me, and thank you so much. And I appreciate everybody for watching this. And 18.